Hello, everybody. Nice to see you, all of you, in this new session. This time is going to be in English. Our invitees are in US and also in Brazil, and connected with Spain, Madrid, the Madrid Innovation Lab. And well, this session are been happening because of the alliance between IDB and Madrid Innovation Lab. And we are happy to have the opportunity today to to go deeper in the ethical of AI in EdTech and HealthTech. And we have here two companies that are working with that procedures. And I am going to start only saying that it is a great opportunity for all of us, and it is a real pleasure to have you here. So thank you very much for being part of this session. So I hand over to Tetsuro Narita, and please introduce this conversation.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks again, Madrid Innovation Lab. It is a pleasure for me to be able to hear together with my my colleague Cesar Rosales and very two entrepreneurs and with a very interesting product and services and value proposition. My name is Tetsuro Narita from IDD Labs, Innovation Laboratory of the Inter-American Development Bank. And thank you for the participants to today's session. I don't know how many of you have been participating in the series of these webinars, and actually this is my third participation in this series. My first participation was to provide what is FAIRLAC, the IDB's initiative to promote an ethical use of ethical AI and responsible data handling. And then my first intervention in this series was to provide a very broad landscape of Latin American entrepreneurial ecosystem and then what's happening in the use of AI and the current consideration of ethical topics in this area. And my previous intervention, second intervention in this series, was to deepen the approach and tools that our FAIRLAC initiative has developed. So our tool, I don't know if many of you already listened or participated, but inside the FAIRLAC initiative, we created AI ethics self-assessment tool for entrepreneurs so that we can accompany entrepreneurs and startups to embed or to advance the consideration or incorporation of the AI ethics approach or good practices of data governance. And today's intervention is a continuation of my previous participations, because after providing landscape and what's happening in the private sector, and after explaining what is our tool, which we developed with an idea of supporting entrepreneurs and to be able to incorporate the AI ethics approach and good data governance, but to be able to convince the participants, to be able to convince more what we have been doing. We decided to invite the real entrepreneurs who have collaborated already with us through this AI ethics self-assessment tool to deepen the process of incorporation or improvement of value proposition based on AI ethics and good data governance. So here I'm very happy to be here with Rafael Figueroa, CEO of Porto Telemedicina, and Kamran, CTO from Slang. Both companies, or both of them, have have gone through together with us, and together with an FAIRLAC initiative to take into consideration the AI ethics approach and then data governance and inside the FAIRLAC initiative approach. So here, this is my introduction, and I'd like to invite Rafael and Kamran with my first question. First, please introduce yourself, and then what is the solution your company has, and and then how you have been using artificial intelligence or machine learning in your product and services, and you have been developing through your company. So that is, my introduction, and then the first question to you in such a way that then you introduce yourself and you introduce your company, please, and maybe starting with Rafael. Thank you.
Thank you, Tetsuro, and thank you to the Madrid Innovation Lab for the invitation, and Cesar. It's been wonderful to work with IDB and participate in FAIRLAC in this last 2 years. This really brought awareness for our team about these important topics. So quickly about ourselves, Porto Telemedicine, we are the lead telehealth provider in Latin America. We develop technology that integrates with medical devices. This was around 2013 to 15, so the trend of IoT. Then we have the trend of big data that was between 2016 and 18 for us. So 3 more years bringing data related to the exam. So after the medical device, we brought the patient context, electronic health records, lab tests, medical prescriptions. And then between 2017 and 2022, these last 5 years, the trend has been machine learning, of course. And then we use the data that we brought for all those integrations, and we used to train machine learning models to automate part of the workflow of telemedicine. So the way that it works, imagine an exam being performed in the rainforest in Brazil or Africa. These exams go from the medical device to a machine learning model that detects diseases. For example, can be arrhythmia in an electrocardiogram, or a stroke in the brain CT scan, or even COVID if it's a chest X-ray. The AI detect this disease and move up in the queue the exams that have any abnormality. So the normal exams, they can wait 2 or 3 hours, but the patients that are having a heart attack or a stroke cannot wait that long. And the AI is there to prioritize these time-sensitive emergencies that arrive to the doctors in about 30 seconds. Then the physicians do the diagnostic, and the results go back to the clinical hospital in about 3 to 4 minutes in those cases that the AI point the mistake. So this is the way that we develop this workflow. And of course, ethics and patient privacy itself is most important, because we are dealing with several different sources of data. And initially, when we started this AI practice in the company about 6 years ago now, we of course thought about anonymization of data. We thought about encryption of data. And this is kind of the foundation of ethics, but it goes way farther than that. You need to think about explainability, about fairness, and several other concepts. And the FAIRLAC really help us to think through and now kind of embed this as a mindset in the company for everything that we develop. And I hope that today we can discuss and go a little deeper on those topics. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I invite you, Kamran. Please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, thank you again, Tetsuro. Thanks, Cesar. Thanks to the folks in Madrid for having me and for hosting this conversation. This is actually the first in the series that I'm participating in, but I'm really, really excited to be here. My name is Kamran Khan. I'm the CTO of Slang, like Tetsuro mentioned. We're a company, we're based in Boston. We have operations throughout Latin America. And what we're doing is solving the issue of professional English education. So we apply a lot of really interesting modern technology, a lot in ML, a lot in natural language processing, to professional English course development and deployment. So we work with individuals as well as organizations like corporations or universities to upskill folks' professional English proficiency. When I talk about professional English, I mean like very, very niche fields. So of course you might be able to learn basic English or maybe even business English on platforms like Open English or Duolingo. But on Slang, we're focused on things like aircraft maintenance English or medical tourism English. And we're using AI in a lot of parts of this stack. So actually my academic background is in AI. So I'm of the era of folks that think that AI is the solution to everything. So I humbly believe that. And so we're using AI in the course creation process, in the understanding of language throughout all of these industry-specific fields, and in the application of these courses to teaching English. So we're using AI to understand how folks learn language, what they should be learning next, what are the best ways to teach language, et cetera. So lots of really interesting applications of ML and lots of opportunities to mess up if we're not thoughtful about it. And that's why this is something that's very important to us as a company, and also candidly just important to me personally, is this topic of AI ethics. I think in the same vein as thinking that AI is the solution to everything, I think that it could also be the undoing of everything if companies and organizations and people aren't thoughtful about these sorts of problems. And so it's a topic that I've been interested in even well before Slang. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm really excited to have been invited. So thank you to you all, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Kamran. As I mentioned in my very first intervention, talking about the landscape, and I mentioned that we have been listening and observing so many interesting initiatives, using an AI, machine learning, and personal data in the area of health, in the area of education. So I think this is a very interesting example, today's session, with real cases, to deepen the discussion about the development of AI-based solutions, but in the area of social impacts like education and health. So thanks again for being here. I don't know, Cesar, do you want to start with your questions and to both of them? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tetsuro, Kamran, and Rafa. So as you know, part of the effort that we are conducting at Fairlac is trying to support companies embed AI ethic principles into their business operations, products, and services. So we'd love to listen from you from the business perspective. What is the value of embedding such approach? What do you think is the most important element of incorporating a responsible approach into the development of these kind of technologies, and also not only to improve the value proposition, but also to mitigate certain risks? No, so maybe, and now I'm going to start with Kamran, so we share a little bit.
For sure. Yeah. Start with the CTO and not the CEO, because I feel like I'm maybe not going to define the business value as concretely in terms of business as the CEO might, but I have a lot to say about that for sure. I do think that, business value aside, I think that it's everybody's responsibility to do this sort of thing. So the first thing that I'll mention is that I think, independent of whether or not there's some immediate bottom line impact of this sort of work, I think we need to do it, right? The nice thing is, I think that this is actually well aligned with business value. I think that the systems that we've built do reward sustainable and responsible growth of businesses. And I do think that this dimension of AI ethics is one of the most important dimensions of sustainability and responsibility moving forward. So I think that, just being able to avoid the sorts of privacy breaches or avoid the sorts of, events that can transpire if you're irresponsible with your AI is good for the business. It's protecting you against any sort of losses in the future. It's a big deal when a company realizes that they've lost all of their data, or that their models are biased in a way that's really disadvantaging some portion of the population. And so from that perspective, I think just the threat of these sort of existential crises in the future for a company means it's very important to be thinking about AI ethics early on. In the longer term horizon, I think that companies that aren't being thoughtful about this, I think that society as a whole is going to realize the importance of these sorts of problems and the significance of the threats that we're talking about. And so I'm sure, in the medium to long term future, it's going to be even more directly rewarded by by the markets, by investors that are looking at companies, this sort of thoughtfulness about the issues.
Great, thanks, Kamran. I will follow up on some of the things you mentioned, but I'd like to listen to Rafa first. Thanks.
Got it. Thanks, and thanks for your points, Kamran. Totally agree here. I would say that we had a few different incentives to start to use AI. The first one was very linked with this time-sensitive diseases. So if I stop to think about what was the business returns on this, I would say that we started improving product reliability and product excellence. So it was focused on the product itself. Our product needs to deliver the diagnostics, and we started to see that when we apply this in remote areas, we reduce the time for diagnostics from like 30 days to the same day. And that was the first value proposition. But then we saw how these were impacting the whole team when we detect cases that have a solution. For example, if arrhythmia, if you do proper intervention quick, you can save that patient life. But 24 hours was not quick enough. So even though 30 days to 24 hours improve a lot the patient experience, the fact that we're losing patients we could save otherwise was actually impacting my team very badly, because they saw that and they say, oh my God, we lost like 10 patients yesterday, that if we had somehow organizing this line better and look at the important cases first, we would be able to save those people otherwise. And even though we see like sometimes 10,000 patients per day, those 10 that we lost was impacting the team so badly. And of course, the families and everybody in the workflow, but especially the team. And that's why we had this hypothesis that AI could help. And we started to raise research grants. So this is how we developed this, through partnership with research foundations, Ministry of Science in Brazil, in the US. And those grants were the first things that make us start to think about patient privacy and ethics. Because when we partner with hospitals and a university to get a grant like this, you have to write a project and think about these intangibles. And then we started to always anonymize the data, always encrypted the data, as I say, like the first things back 2016. And as we started to see results, these 10 patients that we used to lose now being saved, these both prove our hypothesis and at the same time prove a lot of KPIs in the company. So time for abnormal diagnostics improved, life saved improved. And so business KPIs that were kind of doing a positive feedback loop every time we got something like this right. And this kind of work as a fuel for both the company and the investors to believe in this, especially 6 years ago, where it was just the deep learning boom were starting back then. And then this changed the whole mindset of the company. We started to work with a lot of hospitals almost for free in return of this type of collaboration. So we give you the platform for free, and in return, you share the identified data set so we can improve our machine learning models. And by creating these pipelines, this really speed up the possibility of partnerships. And something that also now it's giving a good return, it's in terms of positioning in the market. So not only product and KPIs, but now, for example, we started an operation in France. So we already hired a full-time team there. And now in the second semester, we are building an AI team based in Paris. And something that I was even talking with Cesar before the panel here is that as we worked before in the US and Latin America, I saw a more product-oriented questions. When we are hired by a government, by a hospital, or by a private company, they ask for more business-oriented questions, and some questions in the AI related to what's your accuracy, how many false negatives do you have, do you encrypt the data, this type of questions. Now that I work with France, they are asking, like, do you have a fairness analysis? Are you building inclusive machine learning models, or are you building racist models? Or do you have any type of explainability that shows how your algorithm works to make a decision in a hospital environment? And those types of questions, the first time I'm hearing is in France. And I'm glad that they're starting to ask those questions. And now it's excellent to my board and the investors, because something that we invested years ago, and then again 18 months ago when we joined the Fairlac, and we built tools of explainability, of fairness, and all that require investment. We had to invest to build those type of tools. They now are bringing ROI. They are bringing return of investment because we can expand quicker to this type of nations. They are more privacy aware compared to Latin America in the moment. Something that I rarely see this type of question being asked. And the last thing that came to mind that really impacted us was the fact that we'll build these pipelines with automation. So we have an automatic de-identification pipeline. One of them even can remove letters and numbers from images. So it finds the name of the patient in the X-ray and blur it, for example. The fact that we build these pipelines allow us to close with big customers. So for example, in January of this year, when we had the Omicron explosion, like influenza and Omicron combined, we saw three times the cases of COVID and flu in general compared to the peak of the pandemic. This was December and January now. And then we closed a contract with one of the largest health insurers in Latin America with 5 million lives. And we are able to turn this whole operation on in 48 hours. And the only way that we're allowed to do that with this big insurance, heavily regulated, with all the data problems that they have, was because we had this ethical pipelines built. So we could connect the things with the automatic anonymization, with the interfaces for explainability. We could show to the CTO of the big group, here is where the algorithm is looking for in this X-ray, the pixels that are highlighted in this X-ray. And they saw all these tools. We already have our self-assessment ready. We have the framework ready. And this allows us to really show transparency to the customer and close the contract in 2 days. And then they just open APIs with 5 million lives, which would be impossible 2 years ago without all these tools. So again, we built that with other things in mind. But now this kind of positions us as authorities in the AI vertical, because as Google, IBM, and the big players starting to talk about this and making more visible, or as initiatives at the Fairlac do it, we already have a lot of these tools built. And then we show that we are ahead of the curve in thinking about patient ethics. So it's really returning the investment several-fold now that we are seeing these things running.
So, Cesar, I know you have some follow-up questions, but do you mind if I just take a minute to add on to that? Because Rafael, first of all, kind of, tangential to everything that we're talking about, thanks for all the work that you're doing, because that sounds like an amazing product, and it sounds like you're very directly impacting lives, which is incredible. And actually, what Rafael was just talking about reminded me of something that came up during Slang's process through the self-assessment tool that Tetsuro was describing earlier. And it has to do with what Rafael was mentioning about just making the product better. And I'm actually, I'm sorry I missed this early on, but one of the biggest impacts of all of this was the fact that we're able to provide our services better when we're thoughtful about AI ethics. I mean, one of the kind of tenets of Slang's mission is about reducing inequities, right? We want to teach professional English because in today's world, speaking professional English is one of the most important things that somebody outside of a native English speaking country can do to improve their career prospects or to sort of expand their personal and professional goals. And so if through the development of our product, we accidentally perpetuate additional inequities, for example, if we make it so that our speech recognition models work better on newer smartphones, which is something that came up during this self-assessment, then we're really kind of undermining our own mission and making our product worse for the users that need it the most. So I think the sorts of questions and the sorts of conversations that came out of the self-assessment really helped us develop our product better for exactly the populations that needed it the most.
No, that sounds terrific from both sides. Like incredible, the how you've been able to capitalize on all these learnings, and just to mention a quote. I don't remember exactly if it goes like this, but it's like something like "Fortune smiles to the prepared mind." So part of what we try to do here is to provide elements that help companies structure better all these frameworks and different items that maybe here and there in a way that you can put it together and maximize value in the direction of what Rafael just mentioned. That's just incredible. I didn't know that you were able to do this in in very quick time, which is great. But I wanted to follow up in something that has been on my mind and that Kamran already mentioned about the rewards, right? So the rewards of embedding AI ethics into business products and services at this point sounds like a no-brainer, no? Like, of course, if you build, privacy respectful products and services, someone is going to reward it. But who is rewarding this in real terms, and what do you see day to day with your clients, with your users, etc.? Because one thing is what Rafael just mentioned, no? In certain places where there is obligation to embed all these principles, they will ask these questions. But in countries where all of these concepts are just beginning to grow, what's your experience? I'd like to understand a little bit better on these rewards. I mean, Kamran and Rafa.
Sure. So I'll say probably the most encouraging trend that I've seen in all of this is that basically with every entity that we interact with as a company, whether it's our customers, like the managers at organizations, or the learners, whether it's our investors, or even just folks we pass by in conferences that we're at, I think there's more and more attention paid to all of these topics of AI ethics. And I think it's really encouraging to see that everybody seems to be caring about it more and more. So I think we're getting rewarded, for example, at our customers, just like Rafael, we have a lot of larger corporations or larger customers that want to see proof of privatization of our data, or they want to see proof of lack of bias in our models. And I can only assume that those, that desire to see proof is driven by some internal processes at these companies that have, maybe they have rules about interacting with companies that are going to have their data, or they have internal processes for evaluating these sort of ethical concerns. Whatever the reason is, we're definitely hearing more and more customers ask about this sort of thing, which is a really encouraging trend on the commercial side of things. On the investment side, I mean, you all are steeped in the investment world much more than I am, but I feel like even just this interaction with IDD Lab wouldn't have happened 10 or 20 years ago. I think seeing this sort of thing come up in the investment community, and for us as a company, we do a lot of venture capital fundraising, seeing these questions asked more and more kind of proves that it's something that investors are cluing into as well. And I suspect it's for a lot of the same reasons, right? We're talking about how this is the trend. It's going to be more and more important. People and the markets are going to care about it more in the future. And of course, venture capitalists care about that as well. But even just, I think maybe the most important change has been at the individual level, so that, the individual managers or organizations we're working with, or learners, I feel like there's a trend towards being more privacy aware, being more sort of AI ethics aware. And so we have individuals asking us about these sorts of problems, asking us if their particular accented speech might be graded unfairly in our platform, or if the region of Latin America that they're connecting from is going to have slower performance, or it's going to affect the way that they can take proficiency tests on Slang, or how we're handling their data. We do have a lot of information about how people learn and the knowledge that they have, and it's very valuable and perhaps very sensitive information. And so we have to be very thoughtful about how we're storing that and using it. And people are realizing more and more just how important and sensitive that aspect of privacy is as well. So really across the board, we're hearing more and more questions about these sorts of things. And I think that those questions hint at the fact that people's value systems are shifting to place more emphasis and place more value on AI ethics. So this is not a particularly pinpoint answer to your question, Cesar, but I think everywhere we're seeing rewards increasing for this sort of investment.
That's great. Rafa?
Yes, to complement, so we talk about how the AI and ethics made our products better, and now Kamran gave good examples of how like VCs are asking about that. And something that I would like to add is how this is helping us to attract and retain good talent, as the kind of global hiring frenzy that is happening with developers, because after the pandemic, all the companies kind of got flexible, and now people in Brazil, they are receiving job offers in euros and in dollars. And because of the currency conversion, this of course plays in favor of the north of the world. And I'm talking like 6-1 when compared to euros, which made harder and harder to keep talent only with money. And we form very good talent in Brazil, in the universities, in the companies. But what is happening is that they either live in the country or they are working for foreign companies from Brazil, which then, because of the currency, you make even more money. And so we always had to find two ways of attracting and retaining these talents. First, it's forming inside the company. So really investing in education, in collaboration with Google, with partners to keep training those folks, or through this type of projects when we raise a grant, we partner with international universities, and these kinds of give liberty to the PhDs to fly, but at the same time keeps them on the ground because they have specific milestones on those projects. These are the two things that we are doing to attract those talents. And what happened is that after they are working and dealing with a lot of data and a lot of impact, this is what keep them in the company instead of working for the big guys. And I see that these folks, the smart PhDs, the people that are really going deep dive in machine learning, they are asking this question. They are proud of working in a company that take this thing very serious. And of course, they follow the big trends, the big companies, and from time to time, without quoting specific big guys, but we are seeing ethical teams being fired in those big companies. And these news are circulating in our Slack channels. People are talking, oh, see, this guy is fired there and here. And we are seeing even the big companies that used to be the transparent ones, now they are becoming so huge corporations that it's hard to really like take care and guard all these etiquettes when you have 100,000 employees. And something that linked with what Kamran just said, that it's awesome that IDB is doing this type of talks with startups, and it's not Google and Microsoft that are here on the talk. Because companies like ours are really generating the new jobs and are really tackling spaces that the big guys are not there yet. And those spaces, it's important that we are taking the EdTech framework and kind of leading this talk here. So really important to retain talent. And several times I hear from my team that they are proud, and they go in talks similar to that. To talk about how we use ethics, how we use transparency. Like just one small example, the fact that we have this fairness analysis, whenever we develop a new machine learning model, we try to apply in the 100,000 people data set every time. And when you compare to a scientific publication that usually goes to 500, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 examples, we don't believe that 1,000 examples are enough for really prove that a deep learning model will work in different ethnics, for example. And we try to apply 100,000 with male, female, indigenous, Japanese, Brazilian. In that case, Brazil is very diverse. So this plays in our favor because we train those AI models in a diverse population. Therefore, they generalize better when we go to different data sets. But we always applying this 100,000, and then it makes clear to everybody where the algorithm is not good. And we show this to the customer. For example, last year we trained a COVID model for chest X-ray and CT scans that work very well for people from 35 to 80 years, like that's above 90% accuracy and recall. But when we apply the same algorithm to kids, it went down to 70%. Because we have way fewer examples of child that are hospitalized with COVID than we have for old people. So this showed to ourselves where we need to improve, but especially showed to our customers. And it was great to hear from them, oh, you are here, show me transparency, or show me where your algorithm is weak compared to different age groups. And usually it's the opposite, like the companies do a very specific publication with just like 300 people that are white, male, 45. And then it's very hard to generalize that paper to the real life data set. And I'm going to be open here. We had this internal discussion when we first developed this fairness tool that was developed through the FairLec together with you guys on IDB. The first time we launched that, I remember the more business-oriented investors that we had asking, like, should this be NDA? Like, maybe we shouldn't show this to the customers. And I was saying, this will defeat the purpose of this tool. The purpose is to give transparency and show to our customers here, I need more data from child. Let's start to work with older people, and we do a R&D collaboration to improve, to enhance our data set with more data from kids, and then we're going to be able to put this in production. And this actually helped, because besides selling the tool for older folks, we signed an R&D partnership with the hospital, making clear that we have a fragility there, and we want to work for 6 to 12 months with them to improve. So I understand when the business folks is kind of scared of this type of transparency, but I think this, for our fields, especially for working with healthcare or for working when you are educating someone, it's something that really have to be an extra criteria. It's different compared to Netflix or YouTube. You don't need to know why that video comes first and that second video comes later. But if you're guiding an education path, or if you're making a clinical decision, yes, you need to understand why the path is like this, and really with that improve your workflow. And I see that this type of framework and this type of discussion open the minds of people to be more transparent and work together with the partners, because in the end, machine learning is probabilistic, it's not deterministic. So you really need to keep improving and having this positive feedback loop with the partners.
Yeah, just to add on to something that you just mentioned, Rafael, I think that there are two aspects of this that are kind of in tension. I feel like it's harder to make ML models that are explainable, right? Like I don't have to tell you. I'm sure making your computer vision model that can look at a chest X-ray and show you which parts of the X-ray it's thinking about, it's more difficult. It takes more engineering time. It takes more data to do that. So it makes sense that from like immediate first principles, a lot of companies shy away from doing that, or maybe investors don't want to invest the money into building those sorts of models. But the long-term returns on all of this are so much bigger than how long it takes to kind of develop these more thoughtful models. And the part that's in tension with that is I think that AI is exactly the sort of tech that's needed to expand this data, to expand the populations that we're working with. Like you mentioned, you can do these tests on 100,000 patients and reach the levels of diversity needed for true validation way easier than somebody doing, drug testing, somebody who needs to actually collect the people together and run a trial like that. So I think the fact that ML and AI and the scalability of AI means that you can run these tests a lot quicker, is encouraging for this sort of thing. We had a very similar problem at Slang when we were developing the same speech recognition model that I was mentioning. We use it to grade pronunciation. We give people feedback on how they're pronouncing, how native they sound, how understandable they are. And when we looked at sort of off-the-shelf corpora of data sets for speech recognition model training, it's incredible how much of it is like perfect native English speakers and how little of it is accented speech or imperfect speech or people that make mistakes. And it's just so clear that the vast majority of institutions that are doing research in that space are working with, like you mentioned, Rafael, like white men mostly. Maybe some of these data sets have decent gender representation, but when it comes to accented speech or things like that, there's a very disappointing lack of that sort of data. So I think that the biggest tool that we have right now is that sort of data collection from diverse populations and making sure that our data is fair. And that's something that I also see, there's sort of a trend increasing there. There's more and more, at least in the field of natural language processing, there are more and more data sets coming out that go beyond that like white male 30-year-old who speaks perfect English and are, they're much more diverse, which is exciting.
Yeah, maybe I jump in here because I wanted to ask you a question about, the challenges you have, but already you mentioned that, the very quickly changing environment somehow addressing the issues, for example, internal talent and human resources, and the internal communication, and then even including communication with external stakeholders. Kamran, I think you also mentioned that investors are also changing their attitudes and then taking this kind of topic proactively, etc., etc. But this is encouraging trend. Not only data scientists and taking lead in discussing this and with jargons or technological terminologies that the people cannot understand, but more and more stakeholders are taking a look at this topic, and that is a very good trend. But do you have any challenge internally or externally, for example, in terms of communication? And my concrete question in this topic is, for example, all the examples that you mentioned are so interesting for us, and that makes us to make you more questions, not having doubt on your solutions, but then by curiosity, more and more questions come out, and then some of those questions may be related to, for example, data handling or AI ethics, etc., etc. But inside the existing challenge, my specific question is, have you started feeling some excessive requirements, for example, like the awareness of the stakeholders in general is a good signal, good trend, but then because of the awareness and the overwhelming kind of worriness, in understanding AI-based solution, have you started feeling any over requirements in terms of, for example, the process of due diligence or analysis of your product and services, from stakeholders and investors, etc., etc. So, what are the remaining challenges? And then, have you started feeling any over requirements, in spite that you are startups? You are startups and having so many priorities, to survive and to grow. So those are some of my questions. Both of either of you who can start, please.
Okay, I can start. Can start that one. Challenges. I think we could do a whole panel about challenges. That's true. So yes, there's still a lot of challenges. Of course, now that we had all these things in production and looks very good and it's helping people, but it was 9 years crying and struggling to get to that point. And yes, there's still a lot of challenges. I'm going to mention a technical and a more business challenge. So first of all, technical challenge that keeps coming is, for example, as Kamran said, we can detect pixels in image. And this is more objective. You either had the cancer or you're not. But now we are moving, for example, to tele-mental health, and we are doing telepsychology consultations, telepsychiatric consultations, and these consultations are going to generate medical prescription of controlled drugs. And then you start to feel the responsibility of this, because people are talking from afar, from different places, and prescribing those drugs. And then we started to think, okay, since I was able to apply AI in imaging, how can I now move and apply this in mental health, which then it's text, it's voice. You are transcribing voice to text and analyzing sentiment on this and analyzing keywords. And then I'm seeing how brave Kamran and his company are, because NLP, natural language processing, it's way more abstract or is subjective than imaging, because what is good telehealth consultation and what is not? What is a phrase and what sentiment that phrase have? Depend on who is annotating that data, the sentiment can be different. And when I move same data set from physicians from different countries, they are collaborating with us, and we look at imaging, all of them gonna arrive at the same conclusion. This heart rate have arrhythmia. When I use the same text and the same voice with professionals in different places, they will evaluate the sentiment different. So when you start to try to go to the more language approach to the AI, I see that as way harder to do, in my opinion, technically. And this is why we are focused more and more in imaging, and maybe start waiting for some breakthroughs actually in natural language to be able to use that in a clinical environment in a more, let's go, consistent way. We have too many diversity. So this is one thing that comes to mind when we talk about challenge. And now when talking about business strategy and stakeholders and all that. So Tetsuro, when I think about my 2,000 active customers, only 5 ask for those things, only 5. Like, of course, the big insurance that I mentioned 2 questions ago, that is relevant because he by itself is equivalent to 200 customers in terms of revenue. So that paid off. Like what we invest in the things, we found one big guy that really valued that. The request for proposal really considered this types of element. And by being the one that won this, and by turning this operation so quickly on, we kind of paid the investment back. So we kind of received almost 3 years of ROI with these 5 customers, being the insurance, the bigger one, 2 governments, 1 big hospital. And one thing that also was relevant is that there was a open public bid where they do a big request for proposal, really open, looking for global proposals. Even Accenture joined, that is helping with the Madrid lab. And we won that by exclusivity. That was interesting. They didn't found globally a platform that had all these differentiators that we had around the AI. They found other platforms that were doing the AI similar to us, from Israel, from Korea, but they didn't have all this AI tools and built in, embedded on that. They would have to take a while to develop, as ours was already embedded in the workflow. And only by having that, they gave us the bid, even though our price was not the lowest one. And this really kind of, as I had the ROI with the customers, with this one, I have kind of the mental ROI with my internal stakeholders, because they were sometimes questioning why we're investing this. Like, really, you're looking, we're not Google. We don't need to think about this right now. Just follow the law. The law demands you to de-identify the data, to encrypt it, and to keep within the country. And that's kind of it. Brazil really copied GDPR in their privacy law, which is the European law. So as long as patients give consentment, we are very open to do stuff. And I don't think the users know what that consentment means, at least in the case of healthcare. And whether we want these big things and the stakeholders understood that, it really helped us to do the next round of investment, focus on more AI tools. And now kind of the ethics needs to be embedded in all roadmap. Everything that we do have this caveat over there related to this. And so by this, we kind of get ROI on both senses. But back to your questions, interesting to see that from 2,000 customers, just 5 asked for that. But these are amongst the largest health providers in Latin. So the big ones are already thinking about that. If you talk with the medium and the small ones, unfortunately, they will look at the lowest price, usually in the RFP. And it's hard to have the lowest price if you are doing a lot of R&D development around a tool that could deliver a similar result, but with an unethical approach if they didn't invest anything. And so you need to kind of embed the ROI for the R&D investment in this. But the last point that I would like to mention is that more and more, those tools are being provided in GitHub. They are being provided in Google Colabs. The tools that you guys build are providing a framework so the companies can ask those internal questions. So more and more, the path to put in production is getting shorter. And this helps to at least like help in these types of challenge to mitigate them as we use tools and not reinvent the wheel.
Thank you. Kamran, want to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Rafa, a lot of what you just mentioned resonates with me too. And just to mention on the business side first, we see a lot of these sort of overt requirements increasing too. Like you mentioned, you have those 5 customers. I don't know if you can kind of notice a trend in time of how that's evolving. We're not quite yet at the thousands of customers range. And I can still count on one hand the number of customers that have given us kind of overt ethics requirements. But it's definitely increasing in frequency. I think in our first year of sales, we got 0 of these sorts of questions. And maybe in the second year it was 1. And now it's maybe up to 3 customers are asking us to fill out questionnaires or to answer questions about data privacy and governance or about fairness in our AI models. And so that trend, I think, is really encouraging. And we actually see the same thing that you mentioned, where it tends to be the larger clients that are asking for that sort of thing. So they are the more important clients to us. And it might be a small minority still, but it does seem like the trend is in a good direction. So that's that on the business side. I actually think my gut response to your question, Tetsuro, about challenges in this space is really well aligned with what Rafa mentioned on the technical side. And it is all about, I mean, I'm sort of steeped in this world of natural language processing. And so, maybe things are different in other fields of AI, but language is hard. It is a very, very subtle thing. And I think a lot of data scientists, a lot of ML engineers, maybe even up through today, but at least 10 years ago, thought that this was an immediately solvable problem and that it would be really easy to create speech recognition models and text generation models and machine translation models, and that it's all just math and we can solve it really easily. And then I think the field slowly caught up with what linguists have known for a long time, which is that language is very, very complicated and very human and very subjective. And there aren't rules for grammar and there aren't rules for, sounding native in a particular language. And my worry is that the approach of machine learning, at least in NLP, to sort of account for that, mushiness of language is to make models more complicated, to make them deeper, to add more parameters, to just make them much, much more complicated. And so if you look at the trend in fields like text generation, for example, I'm sure a lot of folks watching have heard of GPT-3, OpenAI's like kind of eerie and very successful text generation model. If you look at the precursors to GPT-3, if you look at GPT-2 and GPT, the trend of how complicated the model is getting is worrying, right? GPT-3 has 100 billion parameters and took, I don't know, like 10 figures of US dollars to train. And it produced a model that's so complicated that it's very hard to get any explainability out of it. There's no one human on earth that can look at GPT-3's weights and tell you what's going on there. And so my concern is that as AI ethics catches up and realizes, actually being able to explain what a model is doing is very important. It's very important to understand what biases are present in it. Privacy comes up. This is something that we've actually been working with at Slang. We are training certain text generation models as well. And one concern is that we might accidentally have a model that's outputting information that reveals private data from the training set, or that is accidentally completing your sentences when you're typing and you're learning English with private information that was in the training set. And so scrubbing training sets of all of that sort of thing is kind of the only 100% sure solution to all of this. But I think folks at OpenAI, for example, are trying to solve this with much more nuanced ways of thinking, which is worrying. But as AI ethics realizes that explainability is important for these reasons, it's catching up. And as it's catching up, the models are getting more and more complicated, harder and harder to explain. And I'm worried that we're not closing that gap, that the pace of model complexity and how little we know about models is faster than how much we're investing to understand the models a bit better and have some of that safety embedded in it. And so I think that that's one of the challenges, to sort of make the sacrifice as a field in machine learning engineering that maybe we can't make more complicated models for this explainability reason. People are really excited about new GPUs that are developed, or new ML specific chips that are developed that allow for the scaling of these models, or gigantic data centers that can crunch all of this data, or really interesting, very deep models that can do more than the shallower models of yesterday. But I think we need to temper that excitement with some reality about the dangers of those bigger data sets, or harder to train models, or deeper networks, which is how explainability suffers, how bias might suffer, that sort of thing. So I would say that's maybe my biggest concern from the technical side is that difference in pace, because it is really encouraging to see people care more and more about AI ethics, especially in AI explainability, for example. But if the models are getting so complicated that we're never going to understand them, then it's worrying. I think I like Rafa, won't mention any large corporations by name, but I think it's very worrying when a car crashes into a highway barrier because it was on some self-driving mode, and the engineers that worked on the model kind of shrug their shoulders and say, like, we don't know why that happened. We can't tell you why that happened. It did. And that, I think that trend is very worrying.
Thank you, Rafa and Kamran. Actually, some of your answers are somehow responding to some questions that we have been receiving through chat. Thank you. This is very, very interesting point. And next question, Cesar.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to take the opportunity to include some of the questions from the audience that are related to these challenges. Now, so one of the questions is how do teams feel about to follow procedures and tools to be transparent, inclusive, fair, that probably delay them in their deliveries or possibilities? Is it necessary to create awareness or an ethical culture? So, I mean, briefly, Rafa, and by the way, this is part of a question that I started to elaborate with respect to the challenges, because as you mentioned, there are many different challenges, and one of them is related to the building of the teams, no? And I mean, it's hard to build a team, and it's also hard to include certain principles that, unless they are very well calibrated into the overall value, it's hard for other members of the team to buy in, right? So, I mean, what's your experience in that?
So about the team, I mentioned so quickly, we use our main tool for attraction is purpose, working with purpose. Therefore, ethics is very close to the heart of this principle and really add to that. Also partnerships, grants. I always prefer to be a part of an ecosystem in a grant, even though the size of the money that will come for is smaller, we can achieve way more when we are collaborating. So this is what we use to attract people. But in terms of the first part of the question and how internally this impacts stakeholders, or if it will take more time to deliver a feature if we embed that. Yes, it will, for sure. And although the AI team love those things, it's not always the same when you're talking with the engineering team that just need to deliver the feature, for example. And it's also something that it helped is that 2 years ago, we had AI teams, software development teams. And now we mix them all. In this last year or so, we now have squads. They are multidisciplinary, and the PhDs sit together side by side with the developers. This really helped us. We also get our lead developer in AI, Nicholas, and now he's leading the telediagnostic team. So he was evolving in the vertical of AI, and then together with the directors, he decided to move and start to run the whole team with end-to-end products. So he's way closer to the final patient, to the final physician, to the owner of the hospital. And this really changed his mindset. I remember when they started to talk with the customer, he say, oh my God, I was kind of living in the moon. A lot of things he thought was not the things that the technician and nurse in the last mile wanted. And we really helped to mix these teams and see the last mile deliver. But internally, yes, we had to really build kind of an internal mindset of talking internally. We do tech talks every 2 weeks. They are internal. So we get the best tech guys that we had, or the physicians that are using the tool. We invite them to come and talk to the company as a whole. So we try to invite the 100 employees to see it. And this is way better than myself just go there and talk. Like hearing directly from the teams, directly from the people that are developing. We did, for example, one in the end of the year with a doctor talking about the engineering of human mistakes. And that was great because they explained medical errors, bias, how much people die because of medical errors. Even in the US is one of the top causes of death. It is medical error. I think it's top 3 or 4. And the fact that a physician was explaining that and then showing how the AI helped him to avoid some of these mistakes, really, it sounds way better to the stakeholders. They are waiting more for that feature than myself going there and just showing some roadmap in Trello. No, it's way better to hear directly from the source in that cases, but it needs to be something constant. Every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we need to keep bringing this thing and just almost justifying the investment internally. Not only the money investment for the VCs, but the time investment for the multidisciplinary teams and the operation teams that are saying, oh, the customer is waiting. No, we need an extra month to make sure that it's inclusive. It's something that 2 years ago was not well heard within these other teams. But now after 2 years, really having a rhythm and this mindset, and like you guys say, it's a framework. You need to think like that and really embed in the day-to-day ops, so it's a constant. And also something that we hear a lot, please use the terms for dummies. Like, don't go there, start accuracy, recall, sensitivity. People not understand that. Talking very operation, terms that people use day-to-day, this also really helps to open people's minds in the importance of this.
Yeah, we see a lot of the same exact things. I think that question from the audience is a great one, because I think it does take a lot of very deliberate investment in culture, like Rafa is describing, and kind of like you've all been working on with this framework. You do have to embed it in your day-to-day ops, because I think a lot of our engineers, for example, we see this on our engineering team, have kind of grown up in an engineering world and in sort of this tech startup boom, where moving fast was the #1 value, where we talk about agile development and like move fast and break things. Like all of these taglines from the tech startup world of a decade ago are now kind of dangerous and pretty harmful. I think, like, you know, being thoughtful about AI ethics, being thoughtful about explainability and privacy and these sorts of things flies in the face of move fast and break things. So there's a little bit of, you know, realignment that certainly has to happen. And I think more and more there are new very hip startup books that are coming out that are undoing a little bit of that sort of harmful culture building, that toxic culture building in the startup world. But I think it just takes a lot of deliberate culture building internally. So actually, exactly like Rafa at his company, we have internal tech talks. We have a lot of conversations about our internal culture and what's important to us. And we emphasize the fact that, you know, while we are a startup and we do need to move somewhat quickly, you know, we're not some gigantic company with nearly infinite resources, and we probably can't take 2 years to develop some small feature. If we can build the feature in a week and have it be really dangerous or not well understood or perhaps biased, or we could take 2 or 3 weeks to build it out and test it for bias and make sure it's well understood, the choice is clear to us. And I think it's just all about building that culture around the value of understandability and lack of bias and all of these subtopics in ethics that we're discussing, and valuing those things over speed. But it does, you know, you have to be very deliberate about it, because for the longest time, at least engineers, but I think basically everybody in the startup world heard that the most important thing is to move fast. And, you know, everything else will solve itself in the future, just move as quickly as possible. I think we're realizing that there's a lot more nuance and subtlety to that advice than was given 10 years ago.
Thank you. I think we already discussed more than 1 hour, and looking at the questions and from the audience. From my side, and I'd like to finish and asking you with the following question, which came from the audience. Yes, thank you very much for explaining the importance of building internal culture, and then having internal culture and then commitment from management like you guys. But then going back to the basics, we have to have good data. So from my side, to finish questions, what the most important challenges in having right data set to train algorithm, and how do you face that problem, having a right data set? If you have right data set or good strategy to have a good data set, combining internal culture, proactiveness of you are showing through this conversation, the results and the social impact are, prosperous. But going back to the basics, very, quick, some few words and regarding your data strategy to have, right data set to train algorithm. Thank you. Maybe,
Yeah. I'll hop on that really quick. I think the one thing that I've learned the most in the development of Slang is that you can make your own data sets. This is something especially early on when we were developing our product. We were a tiny company. Back when it was just me and my co-founder, I felt that we needed to rely on public data sets that existed, on the big data sets that are used for tasks in natural language processing, or were a few years ago. I thought that was the data that we had available, and that's what we had to train our models on. And it legitimately took me a while to realize that, one, those data sets are very biased, they're very homogeneous and have all of these biases baked in. And two, we can collect better data. That, like, as a team of two, as a small startup, there's so many tools out there and so many opportunities to collect more representative data, safer data, more responsible data. And I think it took me kind of an embarrassingly long time for that switch to flip in my mind, to realize the data sets that are out there that are used for these big tasks in machine learning are not the end all to data, and you can just collect better data. So that's my one piece of advice, is to realize that you can do better than the big universities or big organizations that have put together these corpora of data. And then when you're doing it, I think it again requires this thoughtfulness, this deliberateness, this willingness for the process to take longer or be harder, in the name of better representation and solving all of these issues. Because sure, it's a lot harder to get a diverse data set. It's a lot harder to prove that the data set is diverse and understand that it's representative. So you have to be willing to invest a little bit more effort up front to do that. But once you have, the value of the data set is, it's so much better that you get a return on investment pretty immediately. So I think those are the two things that I've learned personally and would carry forward.
Thank you. Rafa, last words.
Also, Kamran, I always thought this similar in terms of the data, because when we started to work with public data sets, it immediately became evident, not only the bias, but in our case of healthcare exams, some of the diagnostics, the labels were actually wrong. So we first got the most famous ones. They're being published by Stanford, MIT, all these big guys, because usually they do the paper and they also release either the code or the data set anonymized. And we put that anonymized data set and we put in the system, so our doctors did diagnostics on it without knowing the label previously. So no like bias, like a double blind test. We sent to two different physicians and they kind of redid one of this, and we found several errors. I don't know when they are compiling or what happened there. And this really like a yellow flag, like, okay, if the most famous one have mistakes, imagine the smaller ones. So let's switch the mindset. And then we start to really collect our data. And of course, now we are talking about deep learning, all these things, because we are in the 9th year of the company. But the core business of Porto, it's interoperability, actually. It's integration, way more than it is machine learning. And the fact that we now have more than 100 models is because first we built a very robust data set with the annotations. So the way that we did that, we did several design sprints. So we did design sprints in partnership with hospitals, and this Google helps us a lot. They flew mentors to Brazil. This was 5 years ago. And then we developed decision trees where the physicians, for example, cardiology, he will look at your exam and will click arrhythmia, next, tachycardia, right branch, next. And so with this decision trees for labels, we're able to create our data sets. But the only way that this worked is because we first collaborated a lot in the UX, in the way that these decision trees were actually increasing doctor productivity. Because the physicians, they need to understand that, okay, if you use this tool, you're going to do more diagnosis per hour. Therefore, we're going to be able to pay you better and charge less from the patient, and made a margin on this. And this is our core of our business model. There are we have 10,000 physicians clicking those tools daily and doing the diagnostics, and then we train our models on top of this. I still like the public data sets, but only as benchmarks. So now the public data sets are actually our tests, our validation data sets. And it's also when we train a model with our own data and we achieve state-of-the-art applying that training model on a public data set. They really show that it's generalizing well, that we remove most of the bias. And so we kind of invert those to do that. And at the same time, since the core business is integration, we integrate today in about 10,000 health facilities between clinics and hospitals. This really demands a lot of discipline and almost a military approach to guarding data from these partners. So even before you have explainability, the encryption pipeline, the identification pipeline to create this clinical research data set was of utmost importance, because we're dealing with data of groups, healthcare groups way larger than us, and they trust us with that data. So we had to embed the security thing in the company since the beginning. But only after that, we deployed the explainability and the fairness to find the weakness and improve. And so that's, I completely agree with this point. Data handling is actually, in some senses, even more important than the algorithm itself. You can use older ML models from 5 years ago, but with a better data set, you're gonna achieve better performance KPIs than if you use a poor data set with the 2022 model, at least for imaging. Kamran can correct me in the NLPPs, but for image, for sure, it's better to use an old deep learning neural net for 5 years ago, but with a proper clean data set instead of the other way around. And therefore, if you are a startup, focus on a niche, and in that niche, really build a unique data set, and you're going to be ahead of the curve in that. Maybe not in the mathematics itself, you can use the big open source ones, but in the data, you really need to take care. And the last piece of advice, and companies that are looking at this, don't reinvent the wheel. Go to GitHub, use all the open source things that are available. If you really curate your data set and create something that is clean and is organized, you can then use a lot of the frameworks and the stuff that are open there and work on this data that you created. And don't try to reinvent itself. Use the framework that IDB built to ask those questions internally and create a specific roadmap, and then run this roadmap in parallel with your main feature roadmap in the way that this is constantly showing up. And we now, every sprint that we do, we have at least one card within the Scrum thing that is related to this, sprints, even if it's just a small deliver. And then this become almost a ritual, like a rhythm of every 2 weeks sprint, we're at least touching in this. And so this is my general guess for advice for small companies that are tackling this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rafa, Kamran, everyone here. It's been a very insightful conversation. We really appreciate sharing your thoughts and your experience in this field. And we congratulate on the good work that you're currently developing. So that's it from our side. I hope this was also insightful and enriching for the audience. So we thank you very much. And I hand over to Cristina to close the segment.
Thank you very much for this exciting session. Very useful, I think, for all the audience. Well, I have a claim: being ethical is good for business. And you have done it with industrial procedures that, for example, such as the ones that has developed IDB Fairlag. So thank you very much. We wait for you in Spain, in Madrid, to expand your business here and well, answer not so technical questions, just the next generation of questions about: are you inclusive? Are you do you have explainability algorithms, and so on? And well, happy to have been with you and all of you. And wait here in Spain, and well, continue the collaboration between IDB and also with you, that really are two great examples of companies that are ethical and, well, very enthusiastic and believers on it. Thank you very much.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
Thanks for having us. And thanks for hosting this conversation. I think having these sorts of conversations is the first step towards better AI ethics everywhere. Thank you.
Thanks,
Sure.
Christina and Madrid Innovation Council. I hope to be there soon. And then I meet Cesar as well, that is based in Spain. Nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.